So let's assume you have two applications, a client and a server. And your client has to send, let's say, repeated telemetry data of some kind or something to the server. So you're going to be sending data to the server. Let's call this like request and then response, right? And you can send like a variety of information from client to server. Like let's say it's like login data, or let's say it's like, I don't know, another event that could happen on the computer, like a task crash or whatever. And all of that information could be bundled up in this communication between the client and server, which makes sense, right? But let's assume that you need to test what's going on between the client and the server. So let's say you've only worked on the client and the server lives all the way in some cloud. And you're inputting like a fake data into the client. It's gonna be really difficult to actually send all of that into the cloud. So if another team is working on the server, what do I do? My thought here is I just use Gen AI to generate a fake server in like, let's say Golang or Python. And I say like, if received login data, reply to client. And so on. So this will be a much simpler server. And you can use that for integration testing. Versus in the cloud, you might have like crazy stuff like Kafka and all of that. Really, the frontier is like, how can I test the client communication code without relying on all of the cloud, right? But being able to verify that this works will give me confidence in my code and also give me confidence to merge it and then test it against the real production server. So my thought is that being able to create these, build custom integration tests with, open source models, that's going to be a major thing going forward.
Okay,
Yeah.
and code testing, in your opinion, is where generative AI can be applied a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So let me give another example, right? So let's say you have a massive C++ program. And there's one function to, let's say, computes alignment of Earth and Sun, compute eclipse time or something like that. This is a complex mathematical calculation, right? And let's say that there's like an algorithm in here, right? Well, what we can do is we can use Gen AI to take that algorithm and like we can create a new function called test eclipse time. So, and then like, let's say compute for 2024, and then expect that it'll be equal to like whatever day the eclipse was this year, So being able to automatically build those test functions and verify the performance of your existing code is really important because this saves a lot of time. This is like mostly like manual boilerplate work. This is like you're just writing and copying, pasting, pretty much. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So we talked about code testing. How about code generation, code translation, and code documentation?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm happy you brought all of that up. So let's start with code generation, right? So the way I think it can be as simple as, let's say, write me a function to, I don't know, get the time from an NTP server, right? And then it'll be like, define the function, get time from server. And this is a pretty straightforward function, right? Like I would say make a request, handle the error, and so on. But this is straightforward, right? Like, you're just kind of reinventing the wheel. I would love to generate functions like this, and then leave the more complex work, like let's say multi-threading, right? That's something that's very hard for Gen AI to work with. You can't really code generate multi-threaded applications is something I found. So like I'm thinking code generation is like get the simple stuff out of the way and then focus on the more complex issues. Yeah.
That's great.
And then documentation, you might already have something like this. And the variables might be like esoteric, like x equals whatever, and who knows what x is. Like you can take the LLM model and use it to generate a description and make it easier for developers to understand what's going on.
So here is where code and language can work together. And you mentioned your affiliation with Red Hat, Ansible. Could you take us through what that is? And even before that, if you could introduce your expertise in IT infrastructure, IT network optimization.
Yeah, so I played a very like external role to this, so I know what happens, but I don't like work with it directly. I think that like one of the things here is like playbooks are like a repetitive thing. So let's say a playbook is like, I don't even know the syntax, but like let's say set up like install Ubuntu, or well, I can't say Ubuntu because it's a Red Hat product, but install Red Hat on this IP, and then like configure, I guess, open up a connection between, kind of like set up the topology somehow between, let's say these three machines. And there's like a switch in here. And like set up for, or like a router and have a communication between these three machines, right? That's something that you like, making sure that they all have paths to communicate with each other through the network. I feel like that's this is all really repetitive stuff that some of like, if config, or configuring like a specific thing, like a Cisco Meraki router, like you would configure like the subnets and the routes and whatever. I think you could like automate creation of subnets and stuff like that. There's a lot of like manually like making sure you can like connect between two nodes on a network because of how complicated networks can get. I really think that like you could train a model to automatically build the topology for you, given a network is sufficiently complex size, and install everything and call it a day.
Got it.
That's
so, This is great, Alex. So we've been talking about bringing code assistance, code models in generative AI to IT modernization. From a practitioner perspective, how do you see this, value translating for the IT management, for the CTO, for the line of business, in your perspective?
I think the more you can automate, the more value you're going to get. One of the biggest problems is like you see like, let's talk about moving applications, right? Like, let's say that you have a massive on-prem setup, right? And this is like a really common use case. You have a building. Let's assume that this is like the office. And then you have, the cloud all the way up here. And over here in the office, you have like, and I'll use a different color to better illustrate my point, but you have servers with like Atlassian applications. So you have like Jira, Confluence. You might even have like an email server or something like that. And that's all on-prem. But really a big task is migrating all of that to the cloud so it can scale up, right? It's very hard to scale up physical resources, but it's very easy to scale up cloud resources. So being able to say, okay, this is like the setup of the OS and how do you access it on the internal network? Being able to copy that over to the cloud and then also have that exact same access, like between the cloud and the office that you did with on-prem, is something that's massively critical in IT modernization. So I think being able to automate moving these servers and their topologies, like let's say there's a subnet like Office 1 is in Chicago, and then the second office is in, let's say, Los Angeles. The LA office is right now talking to Chicago through like a VPN connection of some kind, right? So also being able to emulate that and making sure all the offices can talk to these like private resources in the cloud is going to be really important. So this is a lot of heavy manual work right now. That's really just like copying over the topology and trying to convert it to like something equivalent like AWS or whatever cloud platform of your choice. So that's going to be a big target for Gen AI, I think.
Okay, so code testing followed by code generation, code translation, code documentation are all potential bottlenecks because they are highly manual right now. And with code assistance, code models, generative AI, you could resolve those bottlenecks, make them more iterative, more agile. That way the business can get more value out of the whole automation.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, Ansible is a configuration management and multi-machine deployment system, right? So Ansible playbooks are used by IT administration to basically keep all their machines up to date and deploy the same things across all the machines. So right from the Ansible documentation, right, you have, for example, a play here that says update web servers. And in updating web servers, you have to ensure it's at the latest version, config file. But Apache is like one of the most common web servers in use case, right? And here in the database servers, PostgreSQL is also one of the most common servers, right? It would be so much easier to just repeatedly generate all this stuff because this is all boilerplate code. Yes, it makes sense to like have all of this written out in one playbook to run, but you might as well just go ahead and, you know, generate the playbook, put in like your custom, like here's the changes to the config file, and I want to deploy like Apache and PostgreSQL across all my servers, and I want to have like these for my developers, right? Developers need special machines with like Docker and whatever. So I want to deploy Docker across these machines with these permissions. Being able to do that with natural language is going to be the new forefront of IT automation in my mind, because just so much time gets spent on this and so much like pulling in experts, contracting, like consulting, paying like site reliability engineers to do it. It's such a bloated process, but being able to automate that kind of generation would be killer. Yeah.
That's great. And you mentioned about HashiCorp in addition to Red Hat. Could you please explain how
so
HashiCorp is making the process of generating Ansible playbooks?
Can you pause for 1 second so I can refresh my memory on HashiCorp?
Yeah, sure.
HashiCorp. Oh, okay. I know exactly what HashiCorp does. Yeah, I've used this stuff, Terraform. Yeah. And then Vagrant is also HashiCorp, right? Yeah, so one of the biggest issues, right? So let's look at Terraform. That's going to be a big one, right? Is standardizing infrastructure automation using infrastructure as code. All of this is just so repetitive, right? Like creating Terraform files should be as simple as like, I want to deploy this. So for example, I had to deploy at work, like I had a server I wanted to deploy to specific parts, but it took forever to write the Terraform file. But just saying, being able to write with natural language, like, hey, I would like to deploy like my Docker container to a server and run it in this Kubernetes cluster, that would be a big change, right? Because then, especially being able to train on like AWS specific syntax and being able to work with like AWS, like no matter what AWS is, like the cloud of choice, right? That would save so much time, right? And not having to deal with like the AWS GUI and all of that. So
and in the context of hybrid cloud, how does this help?
In the context of
hybrid cloud, because most enterprises are using more than one cloud. In addition to AWS, they also use Azure. They also have on-prem.
I'm of the opinion that like you should be able to swap out which cloud you use, right? Like you should just be able to say, okay, make this work for GCP, or make this work for on-prem, or make this work for like, Ollie Cloud or whatever if you want to deploy in China. Like
and the number of code repetitions also compound with multiple choices of infrastructure. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, IBM as a company is betting on hybrid cloud and AI. So it definitely makes sense for the company to, target this particular pain point, which could be a blocker in terms of the enterprise really realizing the value of hybrid cloud and AI, because code generation, code translation, code testing and documentation could very well be a blocker in the CTO's pursuit of making the company a truly hybrid cloud, or the CIO's.
Exactly.
Okay.
And one of the bigger problems is like there are edge cases, like all of the clouds behave differently, and all of the different like applications will behave differently, right? You can't just do a one-to-one, because sometimes it'll be an apples to oranges comparison. So I think that one of the most important things you're going to have to do is like, hey, like this is the spec for the API for GCP, and this is the spec for the AI for the API for AWS. Compare the two, and be able to catch the use cases that are different between them. I think that's something LLMs really excel at, is being able to find the differences between two sets of text, right? Like be it code or natural language, like, but being able to identify those differences of just like copying them and making assumptions is going to be critical for like being able to like maintain a hybrid cloud, and like defining with Terraform, Ansible, whatever your choice is here. And especially also like creating images for the hybrid cloud. Like you get like, for example, Amazon loves to push Amazon Linux or whatever, right? HashiCorp has like Vagrant, which like creates development environments, and then also has Packer, which creates the images that are created as code. And you always need like custom images with custom Linux builds, custom kernels, like meeting certain open source requirements. Like there might be FedRAMP requirements. That's a huge one, right? Like
compliance,
like being able to say like, I need you to comply with FedRAMP certification, create this image for my servers. Massive. Do you know how bad the FedRAMP program is? You can only commit code like every so often, and you can't change the environment as much. So you have to get it right the first time. So that's another big one, is like maintaining federal and government compliance, because like making sure you get it right the first time and meet everything they need is like really a case of like checking the boxes and making sure the licenses are good, and sure you can have a person double check it.
Got it. So the code could be error prone, and this is where you can use code generation pilots, code testing pilots, to be able to make the code more bulletproof and resilient, reliable, at the same time efficient as well.
Yeah.
Because you need to comply with all these regulations, which might lead you to generate a lot of code, which could make it also inefficient for you. So how do you balance all this? So it comes down to optimizing for three things: trust, performance, and cost.
Yeah, you have to be careful. I think you already have to know what you're doing. That's a key part. But I don't think it's like a Gen AI is going to replace developers. I don't think that's the right target, right? And Gen AI isn't going to replace IT professionals. Rather, Gen AI is going to help IT professionals move faster and deliver more value. And I think the replacement is the wrong play, but rather teaching them to use these tools to be able to automate and maintain environments with higher uptime. That is the goal you want to get to.
Got it. Yeah, the serviceability, the availability is critical.
Exactly.
I think it should be 99.999% to be compliant with a lot of standards. Makes sense. And Alex, you touched upon the fact that you need to drive value. So the CFO is always gonna want to know how the CIO, how the IT department is spending. Because the IT
department is a giant cost center,
exactly. It's a cost center, exactly. Yeah. And it's a major cost.
Yeah.
If you think about the whole IT spending, the spending on infrastructure is going to be like 60 to 70%, right? Yeah. So how do you see the CFO getting engaged? And we also have some products in our portfolio like Aptio, Turbonomic, that allows you to optimize for IT infrastructure spending specifically. So how do you see the CFO getting involved, and how best should we position code assistant code model offerings for the CFO audience?
I think you should really position in the creation of these like scripts, right? Like Bash, Ansible, all these automation tools for infrastructure as code. That's something that should be created by Gen AI, because a lot of it is just repetitive boilerplate code. You are looking at a spec and you're writing something to a spec. You are going to say you can turning the spec into something actionable is something that you should market, right? Because you don't want to take time writing an application for a spec. You just want to use it immediately. It's like being able to translate that API that like AWS gives you, or that like Slack gives you, for example, like integrating with Slack or Jira. Like you want to translate that into something you can use immediately. So I think that's the biggest way to market, is like take
time to value.
Yeah.
Faster time to value. So that's going to keep the CFO happy.
Yeah.
And
Faster
then
time to value of integration. Yeah.
the operating expense also goes down, and you're reducing overheads because you don't want to deploy additional resources to manage and maintain the code. So this is going to make the CFO happier.
Well, here's another big one, right? Let's say you have a bunch of machine learning engineers and they're all creating their own instances and they're getting the most GPUs they possibly can, right? You can't trust a bunch of individual contributors to build their own machine learning cluster, because it's going to cost you so much money. You need to have the automation, like in an ideal world, limit how much you're allowed to create and actively scale those resources from a central cluster, and also be able to expand when needed, because obviously you'll have to do that. But that's also a big pain point, because you can spend, like, especially machine learning and AI research and development that so many companies are pursuing, is just so costly. So being able to automate the creation of those servers and being able to like access and run those models, but not have to spend money to keep all that uptime, and like being able to do it in a modern, like more serverless way, that's going to be critical as well. So
got it. So flexible scaling.
Yeah.
And
pay as you go. Yeah.
Pay as you go. You're reducing the technical burden because you're able to leverage some of these code snippets across multiple tasks, as opposed to creating redundant work. And you're also gaining operating leverage. You're able to best spread the fixed cost, fixed investment across multiple projects, which is going to give you a lot of operating leverage.
For sure.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex.
Of course. Yeah.
Cool.